Hey guys, Chris from Average Skate Reviews here, and today in this video we're going to be taking a look at the review of the Ownboard Bamboo. In terms of the wheel setup that we're going to be using, it's Ownboard's AT wheels, which are roughly 6.5 inches and are airless. Now if you're expecting us to create a video with their GT setup, which features the 120mm cloud wheels, click on the link down below to our podcast explaining our likes and dislikes with those wheels so you can see essentially why that video is not one that we plan on making anytime soon. But of course, to kick the video off, going to be splitting the video into categories, letting you know my feedback on each of the different areas that I think are most important when you're picking up a board. Bear in mind this might be different for you, but this is the kind of order of things that I look at when I'm picking up a board for myself. And just before we jump into the video, make sure that you like and also subscribe and turn the notification bell on so you can stay up to date and you're also notified every time we post a video. And also make sure you follow our Instagram so you can see what we get up to behind the scenes, and videos on products that you can expect to be coming very soon. All of that stuff will be down below in the video description. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. Now the first category we're going to be looking at is speed. In terms of the AT wheels that Ownboard give you with the board that are airless, the speed that we were able to get on these wheels was roughly between 24 and 26 miles an hour. Now, in terms of your top end, I've got to say that that is quite surprising, especially when you look at the cost of the board, but we'll get into more details about that later on in the video. So from a speed perspective, there's not really much I can criticize here. It did essentially what it said that it would do on the tin, so that's always a good thing when manufacturers put a speed down that's actually achievable. So Ownboard, you get a plus there for the speed. Now, when we look at the acceleration, this is where you definitely see a difference between more expensive boards and boards that are much more, I guess you could say, conservatively priced. The acceleration or the torque with the Ownboard was something that was much more sluggish than we're typically used to. The board will do the top speed that's suggested and even go past that, but actually getting the board up to top speed was where the issue was. Now, despite this board having really powerful motors, both of them are 1500 watts each, it's just that torque that was really lacking with this board. It took a while to get up to top speed in comparison to any other board that we ride, whether it be belt or whether it be hub. It was just one of the things that you did notice while riding this one. So that was the only area that would be nice to see some improvements made. So from there, moving on to the range. Now, again, the different wheel setups that you have will affect the range if you're doing this in cloud wheels, for example, even though I'm not sure why anyone would ever want to do it in cloud wheels. If you're using AT wheels, you can always expect to have maybe a little bit less range. Sorry, Ricky. If you're doing it with AT wheels, you can always expect to get a little bit less range. It's a bigger diameter wheel, so of course it's going to chew up a lot more battery than it would if it was a smaller diameter. And the two resistances that you get with these wheels, cloud wheels being very slick and having essentially quite minimal ground contact, helps to increase your range. But of course, we can get into a whole debate about what pluses and advantages you have with different wheel setups. But the point I'm making here is different wheel sizes, different diameter wheels will affect your range very significantly. But with the all-terrain wheels, we're able to get somewhere between 12 and 17 miles. That's quite a big margin because it really does depend on where we were riding and what we were doing. Now, if you've seen some other videos that we filmed, like the Ownboard First Impressions, you saw that we were sliding the hell out of this board with the AT wheels. Doing things like that, riding on grass, riding up mud hills, that's going to really zap your range because essentially the motors are working much harder. So that's why there's such a big difference in the range. But if you're riding on the roads that we have in Cambridgeshire, around Cambridge, around Ely, which are predominantly flat, just a couple of bridges, maybe a few minor hills, you can expect to get somewhere between 12 and 17 miles. The roads that you're riding on, the weather conditions, whether it's hot or cold, your body, your personal build and what you're carrying, all of these elements will affect the range that you're able to get out of a board. So it's very subjective and dependent on the person that's riding it. So please bear that in mind. But it's fair to say for the price of the board, which is just under £800 currently with the conversion that we have going on right now, the range that you're able to get out of the board and the fact that it does hit the top speed that is suggested on the website is really good value for money. That has to be said. Now, as we move on to braking, I do have to preface the video by saying that the Ownboard Bamboo that we have is one that hasn't received the updates that a lot of the other Ownboards have received. So we're still using the original remote, and also the ESC hasn't been updated. That's essentially what I'm touching on. Like it's not the most up-to-date version that is currently available. So I know that I've seen threads online saying that the acceleration and also braking have been improved slightly by the new updates that have been released. So please bear that in mind when you watch this. But essentially it's still been the same sort of vibe that I'm getting. A lot of people have said that there has been an improvement in the braking and also the acceleration, but the acceleration is still sluggish and the braking is still soft. So just bear what I say with that in mind. But currently the way the braking is on the board is incredibly soft. It's very haphazardous in terms of when the board will actually brake really well and when it won't. What I typically find is if you're rolling down a hill very slowly and you pull back on the remote, it brakes and stops you quite nicely. If you're moving at low speeds and you brake, it works very nicely. But if you're moving at high speeds and you brake, it takes a very, very long time for the board to slow down and actually come to a halt. So in short, the braking on the Ownboard Bamboo with the AT wheels is very, very soft. Again, bear in mind, larger wheels, depending on what gear you have, which is another argument, can have softer braking, and smaller wheels, depending on what gear setup you have, can have much more aggressive braking, so please bear that in mind. But in general, with the setup that we had, braking was soft to say the least. I'd like to hope that the updates that are made to the ESC have made a decent improvement on braking and acceleration, but the way that the board is now, I'd be extremely cautious if I was riding the board in a very, very busy city, just knowing that if I'm going very fast, it's going to have, a pretty big stopping distance for me to be able to actually come to a safe stop is something that needs to be considered. But it would be great to see how the newer own boards perform that have been updated and are essentially using the latest updates to the ESC. I'd like to see what difference that makes. But again, just bear that in mind. This has been a very, very interesting one in regards to braking, but I essentially feel like this is one of those areas that really lets that board down, and it's where essentially the price that you pay for the board is reflected in some of these little elements. They don't seem like very big deals, but if you think about it, the significance of being able to stop when you're going 24 to 26 miles an hour on a skateboard is a pretty big deal. It's something that you want to make sure that you have full control over. Now from there, that brings us really nicely onto the ride of this board. Now the ride is, the best way that I could describe it is if you're fairly new to electric skateboard riding, you're not doing anything overly aggressive, maybe you're using the board just to commute, to go to the shops, to get around the city, you're gonna have absolutely no issues. Essentially what you're paying for the board does get you a pretty good product, that has to be said. But the ride, if you're a little bit more experienced and you like to be a bit more aggressive with things like carving, your general riding, the terrain that you're on, dropping down and off of curbs, that type of stuff, it's where I can describe the ride as a little bit unpredictable. Like we've said this before with other boards like the V-Star board, this more so stands with the Ownboard. I know the bushings are, in terms of my opinion, are much softer than I would like them to be based on my riding preference and my body size and weight. So that meant by even tightening the bushings, it was still very, very unpredictable. If you were riding quite slowly and cautiously and carving side to side, the board kind of did what you wanted it to do, but the second you leant just a little bit too much or a little bit too hard onto one side, it would be incredibly twitchy. It's probably the best word that I can use to describe it. Very, very twitchy. If you're a light rider and you like to have very, very soft bushings, maybe this will be an advantage, but I class myself as probably like a medium-sized rider, and it was just way, way too twitchy and unpredictable for me. Of course, it could be argued that simply changing the bushings could resolve this issue, but what we were doing here was taking a look at how this board is when it comes directly from Ownboard and what type of riding experience that you can have. But this isn't something that's difficult to fix. I have to go ahead and say that I'm not sure that the twitchiness will be completely eliminated once you switch the bushings out. That's just kind of the impression that I got from the experiences that I've had with this board. But again, if you're new to electric skateboard riding or you're still kind of like building your confidence, this would be a good board to go for. But if you're more on the experience side, trying to refine your riding, trying to get better at carving, get deeper, get more aggressive, that's where this board again kind of falls short, and it might be worth considering getting something that's more suited to the task. Now moving on to the general build of the Ownboard and also the deck it has, starting off with the general build. The motors are chunky. The gears, or like, the pulleys that are set up on this board are all metal. Even the casings that protect the belts are all metal. That's something I didn't expect to see. The general build of the board, has to be said, is much, much better than you expect for a board that falls under the 800-pound mark, which is pretty insane to think about. The general construction of the deck itself, the battery enclosure doesn't look great. It looks better than what we saw from the V-Star board, which is, I guess, a very, very comparable product in terms of the price and in terms of the parts they're using. But I felt like the Ownboard was definitely of a higher standard in comparison to the Vesta or the V-Star. Now, in terms of the actual deck itself, with that drop-down sort of setup, I'm a big, big fan of that. I have to say, in terms of the different boards that I've ridden that are bamboo, I really like the drop-down setup. Of course, you have issues with ground clearance, and of course that means that if you're a much bigger or heavier rider, and this is a bamboo deck, so you can expect some flex, how badly does that affect the whole idea of ground clearance below the board? Are you going to be scratching the battery enclosure on the ground? It's definitely something worth thinking about, because this is a flexy deck. It's not very, very flexy like in comparison with things like the bamboo from Evolve, but it is a very, very flexy deck. So if you're a much bigger rider, that drop-down deck would definitely come as a disadvantage because of how minimal your ground clearance would be. But in terms of the general ride, the feel of it for my style of riding and what I like, I was very impressed with the way the deck felt, and also very impressed with the general build quality of the board. But if you are looking at the option of picking up Ownboard's bamboo board, make sure you contact them and see if it's possible to get the board without the black paint on the bamboo deck. I have no idea why you would have a gorgeous bamboo deck and then cover it in black paint. It makes no sense. I expect that from a carbon board, but not a bamboo. So make sure you try and ask them about that to see if you are able to get it, because it looks so much better than the black boards that we see them shipping out standardly. Some other points about the deck is that it's really, really nice to know that you can get a gauge or a sense of where your feet are on the deck without having to look down. So when you're blasting down the road, if you're kind of adjusting your stance, because of the drop down, you know exactly where the end is, where the nose of the board is without needing to look down, which is great. This is something I do wish was present on boards like the Bamboo GTR from Evolve. I know they have it on the Carbon, which is another reason why I really love that deck and that board, but it would be really nice to see this kind of implemented onto more boards, because in my opinion, I think it does work really, really well. But of course, you need to bear in mind the issue about the ground clearance. Now onto the remote. Please bear in mind what I said earlier on in the video about us having Ownboard that hasn't received all of the updates that the ones that are shipping right now have. I know that they have new remotes that have the OLED screen so you can see how fast you're going, battery percentages, all of that kind of good stuff. But the remote that I know quite a few people do have with their own boards is that standard Hobbywing remote that has nothing but a scroll on it, no dead man switch, which I absolutely hate. I like a board to have a dead man switch because when you're, having a conversation with somebody and you might brush past the remote, it just shoots off and the board just flies down the street, and that's not something that I like. I like to know that I have to squeeze that on that dead man switch to be able to engage the board's acceleration. So for me, I know some people don't mind, but I much prefer a dead man switch on the board. Now with the rest of the remote, it essentially had two buttons on the main body of the remote and a switch on the side that allowed you to switch the board into either forward mode or reverse mode. So important to mention that although it has the scroll wheel like booster boards, forwards only goes forwards, back brakes. If you want to be able to reverse, you have to flick the switch to essentially turn the forward scroll into reverse. And of course, it's got the lights to be able to show you on the remote what the battery on the board was like. But if you had the remote that had the screen on it, you'd be able to see the actual percentage, which gives you a much clearer idea of how much battery life you have. There's also another light on the remote control to show you connectivity, and also an additional light to be able to tell you how much battery the actual remote itself has. But as I said, very, very standard remote, nothing special going on here. And now on to the points about charging. This is definitely another area that I have to say does let the board down again, because charge time exceeded 5 hours, which, I don't know any board that takes that long to charge. It's incredibly frustrating. Although the range on this board is pretty good, between sort of 12 and 17 miles. If you have, the cloud wheels, you're able to get upwards of 20 miles on this board, which is great for the price. I think having a 5-hour charge time, or roughly 5 hours, is crazy. That's essentially, if you wake up or you go for a ride, you deplete the battery, you're essentially done for the day. If you stop riding at, say, 5, 6 o'clock and you want to charge the board for a couple of hours and then go back out, I'm not the type of person to jump on a board at half capacity or quarter capacity to go for a ride. I want it to be at 100% because you don't know what's going to happen. You might decide to go longer, you might decide to go further. So the charge time is definitely another area that lets the board down. It would be nice if this board shipped standard with a fast charger. That would make a massive, massive impact on the general experience with having the board. So maybe that's food for thought. If Ownboard are watching this, maybe consider that, because it would make a very big difference. But of course, you have to bear in mind the price that you're paying for this board, which is the next point that I'm going on to now. At under £800 if you're buying it direct from Ownboard, or just over £1,000 if you're buying it from Slick Revolution of the UK, this is definitely one of those boards that could questionably be one of the kings of a board that costs less than £1,000. Of course, there's still a lot of other boards we need to try out, but if you're the type of rider that looks at the Evolve boards, or looks at sort of like the all-terrain type boards that have the option to go street wheels and ATs, the price that you're paying for this board is pretty decent. But this is where the argument kicks in of, who is this board for? Now, I think I touched on this earlier on in the video, but I'll go into a bit more detail now. If you're the type of rider that has some experience, this isn't your first board, you're trying to get a board to refine your carving, something that's a little bit more aggressive with its acceleration and torque, something that gives you a little bit more performance off-road when you're on dirt tracks or grass or riding up hills, then especially with carving, things like that, I don't think that this is the board that you need to be considering, even though it's a good price. I think that's when the argument comes in of spending a little bit extra to get a better performing board, a board that's kind of viewed in a higher category, like, for example, the Evolve GTR range. This isn't us, again, being Evolve fanboys. This is just pure and simply the reality of it. I feel like where I'm at with my carving, you guys have seen my journey if you've been watching the videos from the beginning of where I started to where my skating is now, and that journey of progression means that the way that I carve now, how aggressive I like to ride my boards, the way that the Ownboard performs, the twitchiness that it has, and also the performance of the airless all-terrain wheels, it's too haphazardous if you really like to carve. I can slide the Ownboard with the AT wheels that it comes with as standard easier than I can slide the Stoke, which has 85mm orangutan wheels, which are used and are very slippery. When you think about that, that makes absolutely no sense, because all-terrain wheels are there to provide you essentially with what should be endless grip on the road and great performance off the road. So I feel like if that's the type of rider that you are, that's the kind of riding style you're going for, I would straight up just prefer to go for something like the Evolve GTR range. But if you're new to electric skateboards, you want a board that's going to be able to get you across the city, a board that you're going to be able to tackle multiple terrains with, a board that has a good top speed, then for sure, this is definitely a board that is 100% worth the money that they're asking for. But that's where the argument kicks in. And it's why I'd never wanted to end this video by saying, yep, this is a board that you should go get. Weigh up what you want the board to do, as always, and that will dictate if this is the one that you should go for. If you're looking for a board that has savage acceleration, great braking, great range, and limitless grip on tarmac with AT wheels with aired inner tube tires, then you know where you need to go. But if you're still quite new and you're looking for a board to kind of break you into the whole carving thing quite gently, have a little bit of off-road capabilities, good range, good top speed, and because you're not riding too aggressively, the twitchiness and the unpredictability of the deck when you're riding savagely is okay, you know exactly where you need to go and spend your money. But hopefully this has helped to put those points into perspective for you. This is definitely a good board for the money, depending on what the rider wants and what they need to be able to pick up. But as it stands, it is a good board for the money. Definitely one of the better ones that we've seen around this price point. And if you have any questions for anything that you feel like we might have left out, please comment down below in the comment section. If you want links to pick up this board or any of the others that have been referenced in this video, links will be down below in the video description as well. But thank you very much for watching, guys, and take care till next time. Peace.